It was a quiet, lazy Sunday afternoon when Mira stumbled upon an old, dusty garage sale while walking through her neighborhood. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a little bit of window shopping to pass the time. But then, something caught her eye, an antique doll, sitting all alone on a wooden shelf, its glassy eyes staring back at her. The doll was different from the others. It was old, worn out, and clearly had a history, but something about it seemed strangely familiar. As she approached it, she could almost hear a faint whisper, like the doll was calling to her. The seller, an elderly woman, noticed her interest and smiled. "You have a good eye," the old woman said. "This doll has been in my family for generations. They say it brings bad luck, but it's yours for just a few bucks." Mira laughed it off, thinking it was just a story to make the doll seem more mysterious. After a brief negotiation, she bought the doll, not knowing that this small, innocent purchase would soon turn her life upside down. That night, Mira placed the doll on her bedside table, not thinking much about it. But as soon as the lights went out, she felt uneasy. At first, it was nothing more than the usual creaks and groans of an old apartment, but soon, strange things started happening. The first night, the lights flickered above her head. She assumed it was a power issue, but the flickering continued each night, always around the same time, exactly at midnight. And then came the whispers, low, barely audible voices that seemed to echo through the room. At first, Mira thought she was imagining things, but then, one night, she heard the whisper clearly, "Help me." She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes slowly shifted towards the doll, which now seemed to be watching her, its empty eyes staring directly at her. The next few days were filled with more unsettling events. Objects in her apartment began to move on their own. Her kitchen door would swing open by itself, and her books would fall off the shelves for no reason. The whispers grew louder each night, turning into soft laughter. Mira was terrified, but couldn't bring herself to get rid of the doll. It felt like she was being drawn to it, like it had a hold over her. One evening, after a particularly terrifying encounter, where the doll seemed to twitch on its own, Mira decided to search for answers. She visited the old woman who had sold her the doll. The woman's expression turned serious when Mira mentioned the strange occurrences. "That doll," the woman said, her voice shaking, "wasn't just a toy. It belonged to my grandmother. She was a healer, but one day, she found a lost child in the woods, a little girl who had been abandoned. The child was dying, so my grandmother tried to save her, but she couldn't. The child's soul was restless and angry. In desperation, my grandmother used the doll to trap the spirit inside. But the curse, it's still alive." Mira felt a chill run down her spine. The woman continued, "The spirit of the little girl still resides in the doll. It has haunted my family for years, and now, it has come for you." Fear gnawed at Mira's insides as she realized the full extent of what she was dealing with. She couldn't bear the thought of keeping the doll any longer, but she didn't know how to get rid of it. In a desperate attempt to rid herself of the curse, Mira contacted a paranormal expert, a man named Arvind, who had a reputation for dealing with haunted objects. Arvind arrived at her apartment, armed with protective rituals and equipment. He immediately sensed the malevolent presence that filled the room, his face paling as he glanced at the doll. "The spirit is angry. It doesn't want to be freed," Arvind warned. "We have to act quickly before it consumes you." As he began to perform the exorcism ritual, the room grew colder. The lights flickered violently, and a deep, guttural voice, unmistakably that of the spirit, echoed through the room. "You cannot take me away." Mira felt an overwhelming sense of dread as the doll's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the apartment, knocking over chairs and scattering papers. The spirit had become enraged. Arvind chanted louder, but the spirit of the girl was fighting back with all its might. The doll jerked violently on the table, as if struggling to break free. Mira, now paralyzed by fear, could barely move, her breath shallow and her heart racing. The spirit's voice grew louder, and for a moment, Mira could feel its cold, icy fingers brush against her skin. It was trying to possess her, to take her as its next victim. But then, as Arvind reached the final part of the ritual, the doll fell silent. The room seemed to freeze. Mira's chest felt tight as a dark, shadowy figure began to rise from the doll, swirling into the air. With a final, forceful chant, Arvind thrust his hand forward, and the shadow screamed in agony before disappearing into nothingness. The doll lay motionless on the table. Mira sat there, trembling, as the room slowly returned to normal. The oppressive weight of fear lifted, and the whispers ceased. Arvind explained that the curse had been broken, but that the doll's evil had left a permanent mark on her life. Mira felt relief wash over her, but she knew she could never forget what had happened. She destroyed the doll that night, burning it in a fire that consumed every last trace of its cursed presence. However, Mira still feels the occasional chill in the air, as if something is watching her. Late at night, she sometimes hears the faint sound of whispers calling her name, and she wonders, deep down, if the doll's curse will ever truly be gone.